there is an article that I wanted to read for y'all, because I think it explains a couple of the phenomenons that we've been seeing for, honestly, years. Like, it's really, really frustrating to live in a world where it feels like the reality that I experience and the reality that some random dumbfuck experiences are two different realities. Like, when I go to the taco bar and there's a guy who sits down with me and explains to me how there are Jewish tunnels that are built under New York City and Washington, D.C. that they ferry kids through so that they can suck their blood and become immortal, like, that's a weird day to me. That's a super strange day to me. That's weird as fuck. But it is the reality that I have to experience every now and again. And no, Axo, I didn't see that guy, but he's not the only crazy that frequents the bar. Fleur has actually gotten the experience of one of the other crazies at that bar that I frequent. So there are plenty of experiences there. But I bring up the weird taco guy specifically because that was one of those times where I was like, oh, you guys aren't just weird people on the internet. You're actually flesh and blood people that believe stupid shit. And I finally know why. Let's go ahead and take a read. This is from 2021. This is technically old news, but this is from Ohio State News. It said conservatives are actually, let me see if I can zoom it in a little better so that it's easier to read. There we go. Said conservatives are actually less able to distinguish political truths from falsehood than liberals, mainly because of a glut of right-leaning misinformation. A new national study conducted over 6 months showed. Researchers found that liberals and conservatives in the United States both tended to believe claims that promoted their political views, but that this more often led conservatives to accept falsehoods while rejecting truths. One of the main drivers of the finding appeared to be the American media and information environment. Callie Garrett says that both liberals and conservatives tend to make errors that are influenced by what is good for their side. But the deck is stacked against conservatives because there is so much more misinformation that supports conservative positions. As a result, conservatives are more often led astray. Garrett conducted the study with Robert Bond, Associate Professor of Communication at Ohio State, and their results were published in the Journal of Science Advances. Now, I'm actually curious as to whether or not I'll be able to read this from the journal or if it's going to be paywalled, because, like, very often this shit is paywalled, and it frustrates me because then you've got to go check, you have to go talk to the person who actually wrote it, but it looks like the actual entirety of it is here that we can read. The study involved 1,204 American adults who participated online between January and June of 2019. Every 2 weeks, the researchers identified viral political news stories, 10 true and 10 false, that received high social media engagement. The researchers then asked participants to assess a series of 20 statements that were based on these stories. Participants labeled each one as true or false and indicated how confident they were in their label. In the end, participants had evaluated as many as 240 statements on a broad range of topics and representing many different viewpoints. A separate group of people, recruited online, were surveyed to determine whether the claims, if true, would be better for liberals or for conservatives, or if they were neutral. Overall, both liberals and conservatives were most likely to believe stories that favored their side, whether they were true or not. And that is something to actually point out, because the monster in the room is not actually the random conservative dumbfuck that you're arguing with. He's actually not the person to blame. It turns out that the majority of us are almost always going to be inclined to believe the things that coincide with our political biases. However, it just so happens that reality tends to have a more left-leaning bias when we're looking at the raw data. And that's kind of frustrating because you would hope that this is one of those things where, like, you read it and you go, oh, there is something about the mindset of conservatism that causes this, but no, that's not really the case. The problem is the media apparatus around them. What this means, without me delving any further into the article just yet, I have a theory, and that theory is that if we did not have a major media complex, if it was literally just guys talking at bar, and that was the highest level of political influence that you possibly could have, I actually believe that most conservative people would actually have more liberal viewpoints. However, a steady diet of Fox News, One American News Network, and Alex Jones has poisoned most of their brains to an extent that is incredibly hard for me to dissect in any way other than just kind of accepting that it's frustrating. Trey says, I didn't expect there to be more topics. Yeah, I had one more thing I wanted to talk about. But yeah, my theory is that if you put a bunch of conservatives and liberals together in a room and you bring up things that have nothing to do with the current politics of the time, you're going to find that they agree with each other more often than not. And if they are true things, those things usually tend to have a more liberal or left bias. So you end up getting people who claim they are conservatives, but don't actually end up spouting the conservative talking points as much. Unfortunately, that steady diet of Fox News is there to constantly reinforce their biases. Now, this kind of makes sense, right? If you know the history of Fox News and how it actually was founded, then it makes perfect sense that that would be the case, because Fox News, for those of you who don't know, was not founded to be a news organization. It was founded to be an entertainment empire. And the only reason that Murdoch, the guy who founded it and made it, was to have something that competed with CNN. He literally saw an area that he could insert competition into, and he did so. The entire point of Fox News was to be a well-funded media empire that operated as a foil to a legitimate news organization, and this inadvertently caused them to be more right-wing, because when CNN was arguing, the shit that they saw around them, that started being contorted into the liberal bias of CNN. And then you get two sides of a coin. He literally thought, I could make millions of dollars if I create the other side of the coin and fund it enough that it looks as legitimate as the other organization. That's so fucking wild to me, because it means that the reason that conservatives generally believe falsehoods is because one guy decided that it would make him money if he had some lies to contradict some truths. That's it. That is it from top to bottom. That is the whole conspiracy theory. One guy wanted to make money because he saw a news organization and said, what if I can compete with that with people who say the opposite of what they say? That is such a stupid fucking thing, but that is the reality we live in. Anyway, back into here, it says, for example, participants rated this true statement that received widespread social media engagement. Investigators for the DHS Office of the Inspector General have identified poor conditions in several Texas migrant facilities, including extreme overcrowding and serious health risks. Well, that makes sense, though. And also, Republicans would likely not give a shit if there were health risks in those areas because they don't think illegals are people in the first place. Again, thank you, Fox News. That's why they have the term illegals instead of immigrants. Results showed that 54% of Democrats correctly said the statement was definitely true, compared to only 18% of Republicans. Another statement, a false one, was while serving as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton colluded with Russia, selling 20% of the U.S. uranium supply to that country in exchange for donation to the Clinton Foundation. Here, only 2% of Democrats said this was definitely true, but 41% of Republicans did. These are important factual claims, yet we see vast partisan differences in belief. One of the major issues identified in the study was that these widely shared truths and falsehood have different implications for liberals and conservatives. 2/3 of the high engagement true statements were characterized as benefiting liberals, while only 10% of accurate claims were considered beneficial to conservatives. On the other side, 46 of falsehoods were rated as advantageous to conservatives, compared to 23% of false claims benefiting liberals. We saw that viral political falsehoods tended to benefit conservatives, while truths tended to favor liberals. That makes it a lot harder for conservatives to avoid misconceptions. Although the information environment was the primary reason conservatives were susceptible to misinformation, it may not be the only one. Results showed that Even when the information environment was taken into account, conservatives were still more likely to hold misconceptions than liberals, or misperceptions than liberals. So, again, I think that has more to do with the fact that they already had a steady diet of those news sources. When people have a steady diet of that, or, you know, their social media, where they're getting shit from Alex Jones, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, when you have people with that diet that is just going through them all the time, eventually it will erode their ability to see reality for what it is, because, like most conspiracy theorists, they will become obsessed with the idea that reality is not what you see on the surface. And there is some truth to that statement in certain situations. But when you apply it to everything in life, suddenly you start looking at a green leaf wondering if it's actually yellow. Trey says, I wish your Adventure didn't cover up text, or my avatar didn't cover up text. Sorry about that. Although the information environment was the primary reason conservatives were susceptible to disinformation, it may not be the only one. Results showed that even when the information environment was taken into account, conservatives were slightly more able to hold those misperceptions. Garrett said, it's difficult to say what it is. We can't explain the finding with our data alone. Results did show further distinctions between how conservatives and liberals approached the political claims in the viral stories that they evaluated. Liberals showed a greater overall sensitivity, which characterizes an individual's ability to distinguish truths and falsehoods. Conservatives and liberals were equally good at detecting truths and falsehoods when most true stories were labeled as politically neutral. And again, that kind of goes to what I was saying about this. It has less to do with the individual person. It has more to do with the environment. Yes, there is a steady stream of falsehoods being fed to them, and so when they see stuff out in the wild, they are going to be less scrutinous and more conspiratorious. But by and large, it is because of a media ecosystem that was built for the sole purpose of saying, wow, truth is really good. What if I said the opposite of that to make money? But if more factually accurate stories were labeled political, benefiting either sides, liberals became better than conservatives at distinguishing truths from falsehoods. Conservatives didn't get any worse, but they did not keep up with liberals who were getting better at discerning truths and falsehoods. Conservatives also showed a stronger truth bias, meaning that they were more likely to say that all claims they asked about were true. That's a problem, because some of the claims were outlandish. There should have been no ambiguity about whether or not they were true or not. Garrett said a strength of the study, compared to many previous ones, is that it analyzed a wider range of political claims, reflecting the diversity of the media environment that Americans are exposed to. It clearly confirms the point made by many media commenters that conservatives are awash in false statements that support what they want to believe. We showed that the media environment is shaping people's ability to do the very basic, fundamental task. Democracy depends on people being able to tell the difference between what is true and what is false, and it falters when people have difficulty agreeing on what's real. And yeah, that's kind of where my issue runs into a lot with this. When people are fed that steady diet of bullshit, they start to favor that bullshit, thinking that it's actually what they wanted, despite the fact that the flavor is still kind of fecal-coated. Sean says, and people wonder why flat earthers are coming back. Note the press tone in my voice. It's weird that flat earthers would even be coming back after we just launched the fucking Artemis 2 rocket, but, you know, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? That's just the dumbest shit on the planet. But again, there are people who will do anything in their power to pretend that the world around them always comports to their version of reality, and not that the world around them exists irrespective of their perceptions. Thanks, Fox News. You did this. Hey, you made it to the end. I want to give an extra thanks to the patrons who allow me to do this full time. I want to thank Aaron Rail, Astral, Britzkrieg, Jemshin, Poundini, Red Joker, Victoria, Jonas, Craig, Tarika, Fireshard, Smiling GM, John, Dren Hadamada, Creeper, Sagitta, you know I'm not saying that last part, Sylvie Snow, Valis of Seraph, Ottoman Angel, Rooster Rachel, and Fire Panda, who are all my $20 and up patrons.